So welcome to Parshat VaYeshev this week. And although I had said we were leaving Yaakov behind, I decided that we should spend just one more week with him because I feel like I gave him a hard time, chas v'shalom, and I wanted to find something maybe, I don't know if endearing is the right word, but something about him that felt a little bit different. A different aspect of his personality is maybe the way I want to put it. So I'm going to share my screen for anyone who would like to see it. So this very first pasuk in the parsha, VaYeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan, is that Yaakov settled or sat in the oh boy in the land of his father in Eretz Canaan. And Rashi has, I think, a very critical but interesting, not obvious read of the word VaYeshev. He says, what does VaYeshev mean? Va'od nidrash, a different sort of explanation of this might be that Bikesh Yaakov leshev b'shalva, that Yaakov wished to live at ease. And it was sort of at that moment, kafat alav ragzo shel Yosef, that the troubles with Yosef suddenly came upon him. Right. So Rashi loves to connect different events together, like the reason why one thing precedes or follows another. And so he's saying, why do we learn that Yaakov settles in the land? And immediately we jump into the story with Yosef, where he ends up getting sold into slavery. And the answer is that he wanted to live at ease. Bikesh Yaakov leshev b'shalva. So why is that? Why is that a problem? So when tzaddikim mevakshim leshev b'shalva, amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo dayan letzaddikim ma shemitzukan lahem le'olam haba. Right, that God says, right, to the righteous, are they not satisfied with what is stored up for them in the world to come? That they also wish to live at ease in this world, right? I think that this is hard, right? It sounds to me like God is saying, Yaakov, you're going to get good things in the olam haba. So why would you expect to also get good things in this life? Or maybe even worse, like Yaakov, what chutzpah, that you're not satisfied with this eternal olam haba shalva that's coming your way, that why do you think that you should also get shalva now? And I think, right, if we remember all the things that have happened to Yaakov, like it feels to me like it would be a very normal and appropriate thing to wish for shalva at this moment, to say, like, finally I can take a breath and I can enjoy my grandchildren or my children, or whatever the thing is. Yaakov's at this point of, yeah, I really want to help you, I don't know. And if you, when I traced it back to Breshit Rabbah, I thought that there were two interesting points here. One is that in the Breshit Rabbah story, it's not God talking to Yaakov, but it's the Satan. And I'm not sure what to make of that. Maybe to say that it's not like a divine plan that bad things must happen to tzaddikim in this world. It's more of like a taunt from the devil or the Satan. And then they do an interesting thing where they connect Yaakov to Eov. Right, and in Eov, bad things happen to Eov throughout the whole story of Eov. And they bring one pasuk from Eov where it says that four things. He had no repose, no quiet, no rest, and trouble came. And they list out what do these things mean? No repose, that's from Esav, right? No quiet, that's from Lavan. No rest, that's from Dinah. And then Vayavo Rogez, and trouble came, that's the trouble of Yosef. And I thought, what an interesting comparison for the Midrash to make. I had never heard that before, that Yaakov was compared to Eov, because I think we think of Eov as someone for whom trouble comes upon them without any like bad action, right? And I have been painting the story of Yaakov as someone who's getting their karmic justice throughout Breshit. And so I liked this idea that Yaakov is more of an Eov and less of a Yaakov, whatever that might mean, to say that it felt like all of this was very unfair, right? It feels to me like Reshit Rabbah is trying to answer a question of why is it that bad things happen to tzaddikim or to good people? And that the way in which they could understand it was by saying, we don't know the reason, but we have to imagine it's because good things come to them in the next world. So if you can only get that box in one place, better to get it in the world to come than the world that is. Yes. Did you have a question? Or a comment? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My feeling is that Jacob had it coming to him because of what he did in terms of setting Joseph above all his brothers and favoring him so openly that caused all this enmity.
Yeah. Great. Right. So you're saying it has nothing to do with the Shalva business, right? He had it coming to him.
What do you mean by, I don't understand that word.
Shalva. So the word here, and it's the first word in the third line of Reshit Rabbah, is what Shalva. It's translated as tranquility in the text, or in the Rashi, it's translated as living at ease. And it's what the Midrash classically understands the word VaYeshev to mean, is that Yaakov is mivakesh shalva. That when Yaakov settles, it means that he wants to settle into some kind of tranquil or easy lifestyle.
Okay.
It's not in the text. It's not pshat. It is definitely midrash. And the reason that the midrash understands it that way is they want to connect this pasuk that Yaakov sits down with Yosef's troubles. And so you're saying there's a much more straightforward connection, right? It's Yaakov's own behavior. As the boys grew up, Yaakov's behavior of favoring Yosef came back to cause this trouble. But the Midrash is saying, no, the trouble actually comes from Yaakov wanting to sit in peace. And I actually think that on some level, you're saying the same thing, which is that Yaakov wanted everything to be easy instead of having to sort of like own his preference towards one of his children and try to counterbalance it with something else. Right? That maybe Yaakov wanted things to come easily to him. And the reason that I think that is the other place where we learn that Yaakov is someone who is a Yoshev, a person who sits, is right at the beginning of Toldot when he's born, right? We learn that Yaakov and Esav are born, and Esav is a man of the field. And then it says, V'Yaakov ishtam Yoshev ohalim. Jacob became a mild man. And here it says raising livestock. I have no idea why. That is certainly not the pshat. I would say he's a person who sat in tents. And sometimes we say that meant he sat in the Beit Midrash of Shem Ve'ever, like he was someone who could sit and learn, right? That's like a compliment to someone who's learning. He was someone who was able to sit. But certainly Yoshev Ohalim is unclear. And so I heard a beautiful Dvar Torah from a teacher of mine, where she taught this part of the Sharei Ora. Rabbi Yosef Gikatia is a Spanish Kabbalist, I think 13th century, if I recall correctly. And in this parsha in Toldot, where we're talking about Yoshev Ohalim, he has this great understanding of Yaakov's character. And again, it's just a piece of Yaakov's character that I think we haven't seen before or thought about, explored this year. He says, Kolomar Yaakov hu sod hamidah ha'emtza'it. That Yaakov represents the middle way. And his example, which I just think is very sweet, is the tie that holds the lulav together, that had the seam in the aravot. Right. And so who is Yaakov holding together? Yaakov is holding together two tents, right? He's not Yoshev Ohel. He's not sitting in one tent. He's Yoshev Ohalim. And so he's holding together the Ohel of Abraham, right, which is Chesed, and the Ohel of Yitzchak, which is Din, right? And so I think what the Shari Ora is imagining is that Yaakov comes from a line of men who have very different approaches to the world. Right? Yaakov watches his grandfather Abraham like sort of go through the world with his chesed model. on the one hand, and then he sees his own father who has a very different approach and different understanding, different way of interacting. And instead of feeling like he had to choose either to be like his grandfather or like his father, or instead of feeling like he had to make up his own third way, the Shari Ora imagines that he is Yoshev Ohalim. He's sitting sort of in or in between the tents of Abraham and of Yitzchak. And I think that if we apply that VaYeshev to Yaakov above, right, and to this idea of VaYeshev being wanting to sit beshalva in tranquility, right, it's that Yaakov was actually quite skilled at being someone who held tensions, right, who was able to balance different narratives, right? And in some ways, if we go back and we reread the story of how he deceives Yitzchak, right, he's trying to hold the narrative of his mother, which is that he deserves this birthright and it's appropriate for him to have it, and the model of his father, who seems set, to him in giving the birthright to Esau. And so, right, all of his life, he's trying to hold these tensions between two wives, tensions between his family at home, tensions between, doing what he thinks is right, maybe versus what Lavan wants, of meeting with Esav, of not meeting with Esav. And that all of a sudden, he's asking to have to stop sitting in that tension. He's asking to just give up on like the hard part of life, right? And that in some way, and I don't think that Rabbi Gika Tia comments here, right? But you could read back into our story that Yaakov is trying to retire. He's trying to like give up all the hard things. And God is reminding him that the way that you achieve shalva is through being a Yoshev Ohalim, not just being Yoshev. Right. And so I think that ties into what you were saying, which is that, right, to be a Yoshev Ohalim would be to find a way to balance Yosef and his brothers and to find sort of a middle path where all of his children felt his love. And instead, he wants to give up on that and he wants to favor one. And so what happens when you do that is you have like a messy time. And so that's maybe a second way, right? I think the first way is a very harsh read of God saying, you don't deserve nice things in this life because you're getting them in the next life. I think this read is a little bit more of like a natural consequence, like you're saying, right? Which is if you don't work in this life to hold the tensions, then you won't be able to have peace, right? Peace is not like a spa day. Peace is finding some kind of inner balance or inner tranquility. And then the third way, which is on the next page, let's see if I can turn the page with a sleeping baby on my lap. Here we go. Rabbi David Silberberg talks about the fact that Yaakov is mivakesh shalom. He's someone who is requesting peace, sort of looking ahead to peace. And that's notable, right? It's not that Yoshev is sitting in Shalva, it's asking to sit in Shalva in peace. Hello, Mark, and hello, Charles. We are talking about Yaakov and exploring just like another piece of him that I feel like we haven't looked at yet, which is that when it says VaYeshev Yaakov at the beginning of this week's Parsha, Rashi has this very harsh read that VaYeshev means that he's mivakesh shalva, he's asking for tranquility. And Rashi's read is that God says, like, sorry, tzaddikim only get tranquility in the world to come, not in this world. I think they're trying to answer the question of like why bad things happen to good people. The second read is looking back at Yaakov being a Yoshev Ohalim, is saying Yaakov has always held the tension of opposing truths or opposing sides, two truths, two sides in his hands, and that he wanted to sort of stop doing that. And Mr. Gerber was suggesting that was maybe an outcome of that is that he favored Yosef. Instead of trying to hold on to all of his children, to be Yoshev Ohalim between all of his children, he sort of just naturally wanted the easy route of favoring the one that sort of naturally spoke to him. And so it's more of a natural consequence. It's not like you don't get it in the next world because it's not like you don't get in this world because you're getting it in the next world. It's like you only get it in this world if you work for it. And Yaakov ceased to work for that inner balance or inner peace. And then this third idea that I found here was that it's about his asking for it. That thinking that once we solve current problems, we will enjoy unbridled shalva or serenity. And that's what God is saying is in the next world, right? And that I think is a very loving read of this story, right? Which is to say that God says, Yaakov, listen, like unbridled shalva is not for anyone in this world. That's not a this worldly experience. But you, my beloved tzaddik, one of our avot, will get it in the next world, right? Then it's like something to look forward to from that perspective. But to say that in this world, right, I like what he says, right? It's not to be a gloomy depiction of life that we don't get unbridled shalva, but to urge us to make the most of our present situation with all of its attendant challenges. Like it seems like Yaakov thought he could retire from life's difficulties, right? He comes back from all of the drama of Esav and Lavan and Leah and Dinah and thinks that he can say like he's checked off the box of grappling with challenges, and now he can have this anticipation of the future. And so I like what he says here about that too often we live not in the present, but rather in the future, looking ahead to the next stage when our current struggles will end. And that Chazal is asking us to find the meaning and the fulfillment, to sit in the moment, right? To be VaYeshev, to be sort of fully present, to again find that inner tranquility. We can't affect the outer tranquility all the time, but we can affect our own shalva. And so mivakesh shalva was about some anticipated shalva of the future, when really Yaakov didn't have to be mivakesh. He could have sought out and found his own shalva in this moment of returning home, in this moment, right, of having, all of his children with him, maybe minus Dina, a little bit hard to know. And last year, this parsha came out over Thanksgiving time. And I remember thinking that when we return places, right, that the very beginning of the text is about how Yaakov is going back to Eretz Megurei Aviv, the land where his father had sojourned. And I was thinking about how often like we want to seem like we have reached shalva through our troubles, right? Yaakov runs away from home, a man with many troubles, and he wants to be able to say, look, I've come back evolved. I've come back sort of understanding, more things and being a more shalem, more complete person. And now I can sit in shalva, because that's like the way that it feels good to return somewhere, whether it's like a college reunion, 50th year reunion, or returning to your place of work after you've retired for a visit, or going to, home for Thanksgiving. You want to be able to show off that shalva on some level. And so that was really, I think, part of the problem, was that Yaakov wanted to say, look, I've done it, instead of, look, I'm doing it, right? Like I'm coming back to Megurei Aviv and I'm complete. And he really should have said, I'm coming back with all these new skills, right? And one of my skills is that I'm able to take this Yoshev Ohalim and to really apply it, to really be able to balance my family, to balance the way I respond to things, right? To balance all of those pieces of my life. And it's that at that moment where I will experience this inner shalva. And instead, he expects it to just sort of come upon him without the work that goes into it. Without the learning and the experience and all of those pieces. Last night, after I finished the source sheet, a friend mentioned to me that the Sforno makes a distinction between shalom, peace, and shalva, tranquility, right? And he says, what was the problem? The problem was that Yaakov was asking God for the inner work, the tranquility. Shalom is sort of what happens to you. Like if you wish to live in a time without war, you wish to live b'shalom. That's something you can ask God for. But to think that you can ask God to do the hard sort of inner work to find inner balance or inner peace, that's where Yaakov sort of got himself in trouble. And it's all very interesting because, as you pointed out, right, nowhere in the text does it mention shalva or shalom. But this is a very strong midrashic tradition that comes from the word VaYeshev. And so they chose to use the word shalom because that's what they sort of assumed Yaakov was looking for at that moment. But I'm open to ideas, other thoughts, pushback. Yeah, please go ahead.
Right. And going off on a tangent, but
Sure.
Yaakov spent 6 years in the yeshiva. Where did they get this?
He what?
Yaakov spent 6 years in a yeshiva of, I forget.
Shem VaYeshev, yeah.
Yeah. Where does Rashi or the commentators get this?
Oh, that idea?
Yeah.
That's a great question. We'd have to look in, I think we'd have to look on that pasuk in Toldot, and I could certainly pull it up here and see if he mentions it there. My understanding is that, the Midrash and Rashi, maybe especially, have this really strong desire for things to be like the way they were or the way they wanted them to be at that time, right? They're not concerned about like the anachronistic quality, right? That they say that Abraham wouldn't serve his guests meat and milk because that's not kosher. Like, what does it mean to say that's not kosher? The Torah hadn't been given yet and won't be given for so many generations. And so I think they wanted Yaakov to be a Torah scholar because that's what sort of felt good to them. But it's kind of a ridiculous idea, right? What Torah was he learning?
Or what kind of yeshiva was it? I mean, it's
that's even a better question. Maybe he was learning some apocryphal Torah. Let's see. Okay, Yaakov was Ishtam Yoshev Ohalim, and Rashi says, he must say it here. It's probably from the Midrash. Yoshev Ohalim. Yep, it's from Genesis Rabbah. It's from Breshit Rabbah. Rashi says, what does it mean to be Yoshev Ohalim? Ohalo shel Shem v'ohalo shel Eber. Right? So he also picks up on that. What does it mean to dwell in 2 tents? So as opposed to Rabbi Gikatia, who talks about the sort of the 2 like world views, hashkafot of Abraham and Yitzchak, Rashi leans towards the tents of Shem ve'Ever, who are their own people. And why we think they had a Beit Midrash is something I would have to look into more closely than I could now on the phone. But it's a great question. Yeah, Mark might know the answer.
No, I don't know the answer to that. There's a similar story about when Abraham's taking Isaac to the sacrifice. He's taking him supposedly to go study Torah, to go to study in a yeshiva, basically. That's the kind of,
yeah, similar.
That's why he doesn't tell. He sneaks off he goes in the morning because he's taking, without telling Sarah, he's taking Isaac to go know the Lord, to know God and to study Torah.
Yeah.
For the rabbis, I think it's enough to say VaYeshev. And well, what do you do when you sit? You sit to study.
Right, totally. I think I said something sort of similar at the beginning, which is like that's what like the compliment you pay a yeshiva bacher is like he's a good sitter, right? He can sit still and learn. He doesn't have to like get up and bounce around the room.
Yeah, Sitzfleisch.
Right.
You know that expression?
Yes, I do. So yeah, it's an interesting, right? It could be a compliment in that way. I think it's interesting that from the Kabbalist perspective, he does not care about the Torah learning, right? And so he doesn't feel bound by the Ohalim of Shem ve'Ever in that way. And he's able to come up with this other idea. But honestly, I actually think both of them are ways of thinking about Yaakov that I hadn't thought about him before. Because Yaakov is actually not a sitter, right? He's constantly on the move in our parshiot, running from Esav, working for 14 years for Lavan, fleeing in the nighttime, right? He's not someone who sits in one place. He's someone who's constantly moving. And that maybe you would think it was commendable that he would want to sit in his older age, the golden retirement plan. I don't know. Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
You might, I'm sorry, now I missed the beginning, so you probably said this already, but just that his whole early life was duplicitousness and duplicity and so Dafka, this guy wants to sit and have peace. I mean, he's the guy who, screwed everybody basically. His brother, his parents, whatever, and now he wants to have peace. So there's sort of I think there's sort of a midah keneged midah kind of thing, a justice.
Interesting. So
Doesn't
you're
deserve.
saying, right, I was imagining from these midrashim that they were trying to struggle, right? Because we have to remember that the Rashi doesn't see Yaakov in that light. He sees him as a tzaddik, right? And so
Right.
they're trying to answer like why bad things happen to good people. And you're saying, well, this is actually a case of why like a bad thing happens to a middling type person, right? Someone who made bad choices.
He did some horrible things. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah,
maybe the premise of the midrash is sort of off altogether, for sure. And interesting to think about why, right? Why is it that we understand VaYeshev to be about Bikesh Leishev V'Shalva? And I think it's a good question, right? It's nowhere in the Pshat here. It's completely midrash, but it's a very strong midrashic tradition that everyone sort of works off of. But maybe Rashi sees it as an antidote, right? After all of this time being duplicitous and being deceiving and being conniving, right? Maybe that's hard work, right? To be a con man, to be always like keeping track of your stories. And maybe Yaakov knew that about himself. And he was saying, I'm done with that. I'd rather sit in Shalva. And what does it mean to be told too bad? You can't sit in Shalva. That was, you made your bed.
I guess, yeah, that's what I'm saying is I think in some way, maybe it's between the lines, but I think even Rashi's probably, in some ways you might deserve it, that you were trying to, you of all people were trying to sit in Shalva, you who cheated your brother and did all these horrible things. Lo magia lecha, you don't deserve.
Yeah. And in fact, what I like about that also is that he refuses to learn the lessons of what it means to choose one person over another, right? When he chooses Rachel so clearly over Leah, when Yitzchak chooses Esav over him, when Rivka chooses Yaakov over Esav, right? All of these choosings of one over the other end so painfully, and yet he does the exact same thing with his own children. Instead of learning the lesson and saying, okay, now I won't choose. Right now, I'll try to favor everyone the same. He just sort of feeds into that generational instinct and doesn't fight it, right? He wants to sit b'shalva in it. He wants to say it's fine, it's easy, it's good.
And that ties in with the next verse, because I don't have the verses in front of me, but the next thing it gives the genealogy, doesn't it? Right after this. So the commentators also comment on the fact that it looks like all of the Joseph story pretty much is an interruption in what was going to be a genealogy. It's, Ele Toldot Yaakov, and then it starts to list them, and then it says, and Joseph went to, and I'm sorry, and Joseph, what's the next thing? Does it say Joseph went to, or Joseph's brothers went to herd the flocks or whatever.
Yeah, it goes
So
right into that story.
What should be the natural flow, which should be the continuing of the genealogy. Once you get to Yosef, it tells the whole story about how, this horrible story that his brothers, he had these terrible, he was favored by his father. They had these dreams. He tells his brothers and his father. So again, in a way, it's, you were trying to live in peace. Then the genealogy is supposed to follow, and right away you get that interrupted by this horrible story about favoritism.
Right, and that's what Rashi's right. Rashi loves to sort of figure out why things are bumped up next to each other, right? Why does Sota come after Nazir? Why does, right? Even later in this week's parsha, there's some interesting Rashis and Breshit Rabbis about why Tamar and Yehuda come where they do in the storyline, right? And so I think that that's exactly right. He's saying, what is the connection between the trouble, right? Kafatz alav ragzo shel Yosef. Why was it kafatz alav? It must be connected to this pasuk of VaYeshev Yaakov, and nothing seems so bad about that on the surface. And so therefore we have to imagine, right? We have to understand what could be bad about it that would cause it to be kafatz alav. Right. And so the thing that he has to work with is the Breishi Rabbah.
But Joseph did the same thing when he divided up the tribes. He gave 2 of them to his lineal descent.
Yaakov does that, right? Yaakov gives a double inheritance to Yosef over Reuven, which would be like the right brother, to get a double plot. But what I thought you were going to say is, and this is also Yaakov, but sort of related to Yosef, is when he switches the hands of Manasseh and Ephraim, right? When he sort of moves the younger into the older slot of Yosef's sons when they come to Yaakov at the end. Maybe we can look at that in a few weeks. Yes, this sort of trying to preference one over the other is a super, oh, I forgot that everyone can see my thing. How cool, Mark. I didn't know that you had this book. I didn't know that I had an expert here. Cool. Well, now everyone can see this book. Yes, but I think that you're right. I think that's a great point. Oh, sorry, I can put it back on there. And also it's a link in the chat. But I think that that's a great point, that throughout the entire book of Breshit, we see Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov continuously trying to make order between their children in a way that is harmful and not good. And interestingly, when we enter the book of Shemot, which is much less about the covenantal family and more about the covenantal people, I don't think we see that theme repeating in quite the same way. We'll have to keep an eye out for it. And I think we leave that behind us. That's a misstep of the covenantal family, and we don't have that with the covenantal people in the same way. But yeah, I think that, in some ways, right, we're holding Yaakov to a very high standard. We're saying you have to be someone who can be Yoshev Ohalim, who can recognize and hold nuance and tension. And when you try to stop doing that, you're just going to run into trouble, whether it's sort of natural trouble that comes to you or some kind of like Satan's trouble or God punishing you. That's not for me to say. But I think that the lesson that I drew from it is first of all, that it's like, I don't know, I think it's a very natural instinct to seek tranquility and to think that like if everything sort of outside is fine, everything inside will be fine. And so I find the idea that the peace that Yaakov should have been seeking in his own self is the shalva. That's in our control. And that if we can find shalva in a moment, then like the bad things maybe just don't jump at the same way, right? Kafat is such an interesting verb to use there. And that things are more manageable, perhaps, is a way to think about it, when we have our own inner stability, our own inner peace, and we can manage the bad things that come to us. Because maybe this would have happened anyway, and Yosef would have happened anyway, but it wouldn't have felt kafat alav. It might have felt more manageable. So next week, I promise, Yaakov is really not in the picture. And we will look maybe at Yosef or at dreams or something different. But I did feel like we had only looked at the deceitful piece of Yaakov, and maybe we pulled ourselves back there anyway, because that just felt like the Yaakov that we know. But I think thinking about a Yaakov, A, that holds tensions, and B, that was striving for inner peace, even if in a poor way, it's like a softer way to look at an older Yaakov, someone who's come back to Migurei Aviv after a lot of hardship.
Thank you.
Shakach.
And I will, sorry, we went over. Everyone is welcome to come on Sunday from 4 to 6 at Hillel. We're going to kick off Hanukkah with an olive oil tasting. I have all of these wonderful olive oils from Fustini's, both for trying and for sale. They're super cute, little like bottles of flavored olive oils, and we'll try regular olive oils. It'll be a lot of fun. And we'll light Hanukkah candles at 5:30 and sing songs, play dreidel, eat Hanukkah gelt. So I encourage everyone to come to that. And otherwise, have a good week and a Shabbat Shalom and an early happy Hanukkah.
Thank you. You too.
Okay.
Bye.